Welcome back, everyone. We're going to be continuing our review of Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life and Antidote to Chaos. Moving on to Chapter 5, or Rule 5, which is, do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. A little harsh sounding when you do your initial read-through. And on my initial read-through, I definitely didn't think at all that this chapter would apply to me. I'm a young guy. I have no kids. I'm not a parent. Spoiler, I know. So on my first read through, like I've said, this is my third read through, but on my first, I didn't think that this would apply to me at all. I read the title and the first paragraph or two, and I was thinking, this is all about parenting. This really isn't going to help me. I should move on to the next chapter, chapter 6. But I'll confess, I'll admit that I had to force myself through the first few pages. Of course, his writing style is very interesting and the way he tells stories, but I had to get it out of my head that this chapter didn't apply to me because as I learned throughout my first reading, all of these chapters can apply to everyone if you're willing to learn from them, of course. It doesn't matter your age or your sex or whatever kind of situation you're in, you can learn something from all of his rules. This chapter is chock through with funny stories and examples of what Peterson would consider situations that he's seen fellow parents in where they're not quite hitting the mark. As Peterson, according to Peterson, right, his opinion of effectively parenting, let's say that, getting the desired results, the desired behaviors from your children, right? So he's a lot of stories. This is a very story, example heavy chapter, which is awesome. It provides a lot of good context to the points that he's making, which is great. A lot of good illustrations and he paints the picture well because he's a great writer. I'm going to start off with the first story because that's how he starts off the chapter. So this will be a good introduction to the summary and review of the chapter here. So we'll start off with the first section of the chapter here. Actually, it's not okay. Recently, I watched a 3-year-old boy trail his mother and father slowly through a crowded airport. He was screaming violently at 5-second intervals, and more importantly, he was doing it voluntarily. He wasn't at the end of his tether. As a parent, I could tell from the tone. He was irritating his parents and hundreds of other people to gain attention. Maybe he needed something, but that was no way to get it, and his parents should have let him know that. You might object that perhaps they were worn out and jet lag after a long trip. But 30 seconds of carefully directed problem solving would have brought the shameful episode to a halt. More thoughtful parents wouldn't have let someone they truly cared for become the object of a crowd's contempt. I've also watched a couple unable or unwilling to say no to their 2-year-old, obliged to follow closely behind him everywhere he went, every moment of what was supposed to be an enjoyable social visit, because he misbehaved so badly when not micromanaged that he couldn't be given a second of genuine freedom without risk. The desire of his parents to let their child act without correction on every impulse perversely produced precisely the opposite effect. They deprived him instead of every opportunity to engage in independent action. Because they didn't dare to teach him what no means, he had no conception of the reasonable limits enabling maximal toddler autonomy. It was a classic example of too much chaos breeding too much order, and the inevitable reversal. I have, similarly, seen parents rendered unable to engage in adult conversation at a dinner party because their children, 4 and 5, dominated the social scene, eating the centers out of all the sliced bread, subjecting everyone to their juvenile tyranny, while mom and dad watched, embarrassed and bereft of the ability to intervene. So that's one example of the many the parenting stories, or I guess situations of ineffective, I don't want to say bad, ineffective parenting. That's one of the many examples, because like I said, this chapter is chock through with these examples. The way I would sum up this chapter into 2 phrases, maybe 2 general themes, 2 general rules, I guess, would be 1, it's better, according to Jordan, to teach your children how to be strong, independent, rather than trying to protect your children and coddle them and create a safe space for them. That's what he believes. Because eventually, as he says in the chapter, your children have to grow up. Eventually, they become adults and go out into the real world, where one day, if you're a parent, you won't be able to always be there for them. So if you protect them for their whole lives, they don't learn anything about the real world, the big scary world out there. They won't be well equipped for anything. And the first catastrophe, my God, cannot say the word catastrophe. The first catastrophe or even minor setback that befalls them is going to wipe them out. And so that's one of the two, I would say, broad themes of the chapter. It's better to render your children competent rather than safe. And the second thing I would say with the chapter, of course, this is a meditation on effective parenting. And it's a great chapter, I think, for parents. See, the title, Do Not Let Your Children Do Anything That Makes You Dislike Them, I didn't understand it at first. I had to get a broader context. I had to read the whole chapter first before realizing what that means. Now that I've read the chapter, and of course, I'm not reading the whole chapters in these videos, so you'll have to find out more for yourself by picking up the book, which of course I highly recommend. After reading the title of Rule 5, I now understand the title, and this is the second, maybe more important, central theme of the chapter. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them, is a warning to the resentment that you can hold toward your children as a parent. And a lot of the chapter is dedicated to these stories of ineffective parenting, but furthermore, the result of ineffective parents, both on the parents and on the child. Because just like with us in our day-to-day lives, if a parent is unable or unwilling to discipline their child carefully, consistently, and effectively, when bad behavior rears its ugly head up, like Jordan says in the video, resentment can breed like that. It's similar to if you were living with anyone, I have a roommate, for example, and if I were to never speak up for myself, never stand up for myself, when he did something that I didn't like, resentment builds. That goes for any situation, whether you're in the work environment, whether you're a parent, you're living with a roommate, or you're out with friends. When people do things that you don't like and you feel it somewhere, like somewhere in your chest, like you can't quite explain. You'd have a hard time describing it to a friend, that feeling, but you know that feeling. Maybe it's your conscience, but something's telling you that you need to speak up. And you need to teach that person how to treat you. And that's the essence of Rule 5, is teaching your children how to treat you so that you can teach them how to treat other people, so that they'll be socially desirable, which is what Peterson says in the chapter is the most important thing that you should be doing if you want to be a good, effective parent for your children, is above all else. He says, I think near the end here, I'm going to paraphrase, but it's something like, it's even more important than trying to help your child, form a sense of an identity, a self-identity, right? Even above that is teaching your children to be socially desirable. And what he says in the chapter is, if you don't teach them, if you don't discipline them in the home, on your own, when they're young, when they go out into the world and they haven't been disciplined properly, the world will discipline them and they won't like it. And he talks about how, kind of like what he said at the beginning in the story here, is a good example of how some parents would rather be their children's friends rather than parents, because they can see always disciplining their children, always taking things away from them as a form of tyranny. They don't want to be tyrants. They want to be liked. They want to be loved by their kids, of course. And they think if they're taking things away and punishing them and making them feel sad and they can see the hatred in their children's eyes, even though it's almost always temporary, they feel, I don't want that. I want to be my kids' friends. And see, as Peterson says in the chapter, what he believes is, if you're trying to be your child's friend, you're actually hurting them more. He says at a part in the chapter here, I'm going to paraphrase again, but he says something along the lines of, your child is going to have many friends throughout his or her life, but only two parents maybe unfortunately even one, but that's what he says. Your child's going to have many friends throughout his or her life, but only two parents, or one, of course. And your job, if you're trying to be a good parent, is to discipline them. Because like I said, if you don't discipline them in your home, on your own, when they're young, society will discipline them, and in a much harsher way than you would. And that's his warning. So when he says, don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them, it's a warning against resentment. I think some people, as he says here, some parents become a little too naive, and they inflate their beliefs when it comes to parenting, and they tell themselves things like, "Oh, I would never hit my child. I would never hate my child. I would never harbor anger against my child." And Peterson says, yes, you would. You absolutely would. If you let your kids run all over you, just like for anyone in any situation in life, if you're letting people run all over you and you're not saying things, you're not standing up for yourself in the moment when it happens, what you're doing is you're teaching people, walk all over me. I'm your doormat. And every time that you don't speak up for yourself, it gets harder and harder and harder for you to say something, and harder and harder and harder to get that habit out of the person's head, because it becomes a little more entrenched. Every time that you don't stand up for yourself and don't tell people how you're feeling, whoever the perpetrator is, it kind of gets reinforced in their head, and they think, oh yeah, Jake's okay with this. He didn't say anything the first time. It's the fifth time now. He doesn't care. And eventually it's not even a thought for them, but you're still thinking about it. You've been stewing over it this whole time. You've been letting this turn into resentment, and you maybe unbeknownst to you, or maybe you do know it, which I would argue is even worse. So the title, Don't Let Your Children Do Anything That Makes You Dislike Them, is a warning. And it's an encouragement to discipline your kids, because it's uncomfortable, to say the least, painful in the short term, but beneficial for both you and for your children in the long term. So, like I said, full of stories like that, some funny ones and some more serious ones, some sad ones, but I thought it was a great chapter. Like I said, I'm no parent, but I think it was great. I think it's applicable. I mean, maybe I'll be a parent someday, maybe I won't, but whether you have a bunch of kids or you have none, and you're not planning on having any anytime soon or ever, I would say even to become a little more detached, a little broader from Rule 5 of its title and its theme of parenting, I would say the real essence of this chapter, the most important teaching from this, is the warning against resentment, standing up for yourself and telling people, teaching people how to treat you. I think it's very important, and I think it's something a lot of people don't or won't do for themselves. And it's just like, as Peterson says, disciplining your child in the moment is uncomfortable and painful in the short term. It's the best thing to do for everyone involved in the long term. And so I'm going to choose a section here at the end of the chapter to sum up the chapter here. He says, discuss your likes and dislikes with regards to your children with your partner, or failing that, a friend, but don't be afraid to have likes and dislikes. You can judge suitable from unsuitable and wheat from chaff. You realize the difference between good and evil. Having clarified your stance, having assessed yourself for pettiness, arrogance, and resentment, you take the next step and you make your children behave. You take responsibility for their discipline. You take responsibility for the mistakes you'll inevitably make while disciplining. You can apologize when you're wrong and learn to do better. You love your kids, after all. If their actions make you dislike them, think what an effect they'll have on other people who care much less about them than you. Those other people will punish them severely by omission or by commission. Don't allow that to happen. Better to let your little monsters know what's desirable and what's not, so they become sophisticated denizens of the world outside the family. A child who pays attention instead of drifting and can play, and does not whine, and is comical but not annoying, and is trustworthy, that child will have friends wherever he goes. His teachers will like him, and so will his parents. If he attends politely to adults, he'll be attended to, smiled at, and happily instructed. He'll thrive in what can so easily be a cold, unforgiving, and hostile world. Clear rules make for secure children and calm, rational parents. Clear principles of discipline and punishment balance mercy and justice so that social development and psychological maturity can be optimally promoted. Clear rules and proper discipline help the child and the family and society establish, maintain, and expand the order that's all that protects us from chaos and the terrors of the underworld, where everything is uncertain, anxiety-provoking, hopeless, and depressing. There are no greater gifts than a committed and courageous parent can bestow. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them.